Author and activist Michael Shellenberger played a pivotal role earlier this year in releasing The Twitter Files, which exposed the power big tech companies have on controlling narratives. Shellenberger shared previously unseen information regarding Twitter's content moderation before Elon Musk took over Twitter, exposing the level of influence high-level executives and the intelligence service had on the platform.
The government no longer needs a predicate of calling you a terrorist or an extremist to deploy government resources to counter your political activity. The only predicate it needs is simply the assertion that the opinion you expressed on social media is wrong.
Michael Shellenberger, thank you for joining us. Now, you have done a lot of work that's led global conversations around what you've dubbed the censorship industrial complex. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why this work is important to you?
Well, sure. I mean, my interest in censorship really began when I was one of the Twitter Files authors. We were given access to internal emails and messages within Twitter. And what we discovered was at first the kind of censorship that you would expect, very politically correct, very sort of radical left censorship. But then we started to discover something very strange, which is we started to see requests from the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, other sort of security and intelligence agencies asking for people to be censored. We found that very chilling and very strange, and that really was the beginning of starting to understand that there was a vast apparatus of government agencies around the world, not just in the United States, think tanks, some of them associated with universities, and other groups that were putting pressure on social media platforms to engage in outright censorship of people for just having different views, whether on COVID vaccines or on climate change or on various racial matters, sensitive issues that should be publicly debated, that our Constitution protects as free speech, really clear violations of the First Amendment. And we was shocking to see that the government was funding these organizations to the tune of tens of millions and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's why we labeled it the censorship industrial complex, because it's quite big, quite powerful, and really until recently was hidden from the public.
The Twitter Files even had an impact in Australia, with Senator Alex Antic taking his concerns to the government.
The question we asked was, is the Department of Home Affairs censoring posts on social media by Australians? That was in light of the Twitter Files scandal in the United States. So the question was a simple one: are we doing the same thing here? But the answer was the one that was staggering. What we learnt from that process and through the Senate estimates process which followed it up was that, yes, the Department of Home Affairs were effectively playing a role. They were engaging a major multinational company, M&C Saatchi, which is a PR company, and paying them around about $1 million over that period to sift through social media posts of Australians, and then whatever posts they deemed to be misinformation or disinformation, they were referring back to the social media companies, so that's all of Meta's companies and others, for removal, for dampening down, if you like, for want of another way of putting it, or for some other form of censorship. Now, that's wrong on a whole range of reasons, not the least of which being the interference by two major multinational companies in Australia's freedom of speech arena, democracy, but also because many of those posts that were originally pulled down ultimately turned out to be 100% true, therein highlighting the problem. Who is the arbiter of truth in this censorship industrial complex that we're seeing develop now?
And as the countdown to the Voice referendum in Australia gains momentum, Shellenberger has a warning for Australians.
I think the people of Australia should be very alarmed by this. This is an infringement on your sovereignty. It's potentially election interference by Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and owner of Facebook, as well as of Meta and of Meta, Facebook, Threads, and Instagram. I mean, I was shocked by your reporting, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I thought I had seen quite a bit already, but what we saw there is really Zuckerberg and Facebook putting their finger on the scale and really censoring opponents of this major referendum you have down there, a very sensitive racial referendum with a lot of different views, and really funding partisans in that fight to censor their opponents. I mean, it's really outrageous. It's really straight out of George Orwell.
A growing number of fact-checking projects around the world are analyzing claims of public figures to determine
when it came to exposing the issues with the IFCN, they stopped responding to Sky News Australia emails after we started asking about glaring issues in its processes. This includes pointing out that 53 fact-checkers across the world have expired credentials, and our understanding is that this body, which has received millions of dollars to certify fact-checkers, is being delayed by pure incompetency. And while we could not get an interview with IFCN Director Angie Holland, this clip from her time as a fact-checker at Politico in America is very telling.
It gets really a little bit mental when people say why we're wrong if they're not dealing with the evidence. And my response as editor is well, you can say that we're biased, but all you want, but tell me where the fact check is wrong.
It is this kind of attitude from these fact-checkers that has seen Liberal Senator James Paterson become such a strong advocate in the fight against big tech companies.
I was increasingly concerned as we got closer to the referendum that it was going to unfairly impinge on the news and information that Australian citizens could access to make up their own minds.
The investigation that we've done has found that there is a direct commercial contract with Meta. They have a direct one-on-one relationship. How much does that change that narrative? Is that what the public has been sold?
You're right, Jack. I question Meta about their approach to fact-checking because, as they themselves have now acknowledged, during the pandemic period, they were far too overzealous in restricting content that was able to be posted on their platform and labelling things misinformation, which we now understand was not misinformation at the time, or at least we understand are arguable cases on either side and should be able to be freely debated. And they gave a commitment to me, and through me, the Australian people and the Parliament, that they were going to be much less keen to be involved in censoring content. Well, outsourcing that censorship to self-appointed fact-checkers, as we now know is the case with RMIT, because they didn't have a current accreditation with the International Fact-Checking Network, is not an excuse. It does not permit them to silence the legitimate perspectives and opinions of Australian citizens, and it is no cover at all.